At 8:32 on the morning of May 18th, 1980, the side of a mountain collapsed. Not cracked, not crumbled, collapsed. In less than a minute, nearly an entire face of Mount St. Helens disappeared into motion, unleashing a blast of superheated gas, ash, rock, and pressure that tore across the landscape faster than most aircraft could fly. Forests flattened outward in perfect rows. Rivers vanished beneath boiling debris. Daylight turned the color of wet cement. For people living nearby, the sound arrived after the destruction already had. Some compared it to thunder. Others said it felt like artillery rolling through the earth itself. 57 people would die in the eruption. Entire valleys would be erased. Ash would drift across multiple states, reaching cities thousands of miles away. But the terrifying part was not that the mountain exploded without warning. It was that the warnings had been there for weeks. The mountain had been trembling since March. Small earthquakes rattled the slopes beneath the snow. Steam vents opened near the summit like pressure escaping from a sealed engine. Scientists watched the northern face of the volcano begin to bulge outward day after day, swelling several feet at a time as magma forced its way upward beneath the surface. The mountain was changing shape in real time. And still, cabins remained occupied. Loggers continued working. Tourists gathered at observation points, hoping to witness history from a safe distance. But mountains do not measure safety the way humans do. On that Sunday morning, the pressure finally outran prediction, and the Pacific Northwest watched an entire landscape disappear beneath ash and fire. Long before the eruption of 1980, Mount St. Helens already carried a violent history buried beneath its snow-covered slopes. Rising above the forests of southern Washington, the volcano looked almost impossibly perfect. Its sharp white peak stood apart from the surrounding Cascade Mountains, like something painted onto the horizon, rather than formed by nature. Locals often called it the Fuji of America. From a distance, it appeared calm, balanced, ancient in the quiet way mountains usually seem. But Mount St. Helens was never truly asleep. For thousands of years, the volcano had erupted in cycles, building and destroying itself over and over again. Layers of hardened lava, ash, and volcanic debris formed the mountain like stacked scars from previous explosions. Entire forests had been buried before. Rivers had been rerouted before. The land surrounding the volcano was not untouched wilderness. It was old wreckage, softened by time. By the 20th century, though, memory had faded. Generations grew up seeing the mountain as permanent. Roads wound through thick evergreen forests at its base. Logging camps operated nearby. Families vacationed beside Spirit Lake beneath the shadow of the volcano. Cabins lined the hillsides. Tourists filled postcards with photographs of the snow-capped summit glowing pink during sunset. The mountain had become scenery. Even among scientists, Mount St. Helens drew less concern than larger volcanoes elsewhere in the world. America simply did not think of itself as a country threatened by volcanic catastrophe. Eruptions belonged to distant islands or ancient history books, not modern Washington state. But deep beneath the mountain, pressure was building again. Far below the forests, magma slowly forced its way upward through fractures in the earth, heating groundwater into steam and stretching the interior of the volcano like metal under strain. No one standing near the mountain could feel it yet, but the landscape was already beginning to tighten, like a clock approaching midnight. The first warning arrived beneath the snow. On March 20th, 1980, a small earthquake struck below Mount St. Helens, rattling windows and surprising nearby residents. By itself, the tremor did not seem extraordinary. The Pacific Northwest experienced earthquakes often enough that most people barely paused to think about them. But then another came, and another. Within days, hundreds of earthquakes were rolling beneath the mountain every week. Instruments installed by geologists began recording constant movement deep underground, as if something enormous was forcing its way upward through ancient rock. Scientists from the United States Geological Survey rushed toward the volcano, hauling monitoring equipment through snow-covered terrain while trying to understand what exactly they were witnessing. Some believed magma was rising beneath the mountain. Others warned steam pressure alone could trigger dangerous explosions. The truth was that nobody knew for certain. Then the summit exploded. On March 27th, a sudden blast of steam burst through the top of the volcano, punching a crater through the ice and throwing ash thousands of feet into the air. Helicopters circling nearby captured images that stunned the country. A mountain many Americans barely thought about had suddenly begun smoking like a giant industrial furnace. The eruptions continued through April. Ash clouds drifted across nearby towns. Tremors rattled homes almost daily. Cracks spread across the summit, while helicopters photographed something even more disturbing developing along the volcano's northern slope. The mountain was bulging outward. Each day, the side of Mount St. Helens expanded several feet farther than before. Trees tilted at unnatural angles. Entire sections of earth appeared to swell from internal pressure. Geologists realized the volcano was physically deforming in real time, pushed outward by magma accumulating beneath the surface like a hydraulic jack beneath stone. The danger zone widened quickly. Roadblocks appeared along mountain highways. National Guard troops enforced evacuations. But outside the restricted areas, crowds still gathered to watch. Because even standing beneath a smoking volcano, many people still believed the mountain had more warnings left to give. By late April, the northern face of Mount St. Helens was no longer simply changing. It was deforming at a pace scientists had never witnessed before. Using surveying equipment and aerial photography, researchers measured the mountain expanding outward nearly 5 feet per day in some areas. Entire sections of the volcano were being pushed away from the interior by magma forcing upward beneath the surface. From the air, the mountain looked swollen, as if pressure inside it was trying to tear free through the weakest point available. Geologists began referring to it simply as the Bulge, and the bulge kept growing. Inside monitoring stations, maps were updated almost hourly. Earthquake readings flickered constantly across instruments. Small steam eruptions continued punching ash into the sky, while scientists debated what kind of eruption might come next. Some feared a vertical explosion from the summit. Others warned the unstable northern slope itself could collapse first. No one fully understood what would happen if it did. Meanwhile, outside the scientific community, frustration was growing. Logging companies pushed for access to closed timber areas. Cabin owners argued evacuation orders were excessive. Tourists crowded observation points, hoping to witness history from a safe distance. The volcano had become both a threat and a spectacle. Then there was Harry R. Truman. The stubborn 83-year-old lodge owner at Spirit Lake refused to evacuate, becoming a folk hero to reporters covering the growing crisis. While scientists warned of catastrophic danger, Truman gave interviews beside the mountain with a grin, insisting the volcano would never take him. The morning began quietly. Just after sunrise on May 18, 1980, the forests surrounding Mount St. Helens sat beneath clear skies and cold spring air. To anyone standing miles away, the volcano looked calm again, almost peaceful after weeks of tension and steam eruptions. Then, at 8:32 a.m., the mountain broke apart. A magnitude 5.1 earthquake struck directly beneath the volcano, triggering the largest landslide in recorded history. The entire unstable northern face collapsed outward in seconds, releasing millions of tons of rock, snow, and ice down the mountain at terrifying speed. But the landslide was only the opening blow. With the northern slope suddenly gone, the pressure trapped inside the volcano detonated sideways. A lateral blast of superheated gas and ash exploded northward at hundreds of miles per hour, flattening everything in its path. Forests vanished instantly. Trees snapped like matchsticks and fell in perfect rows, stretching for miles across the landscape. Lakes boiled with debris. Entire valleys disappeared beneath darkness and ash. Many victims never even saw the eruption coming. Some were overtaken before they could start their vehicles. Others were hidden behind ridges and believed they were safely outside the danger zone. Within minutes, daylight across parts of Washington turned black as volcanic ash climbed miles into the atmosphere, towering above the Pacific Northwest like a second storm system swallowing the sky. After the initial collapse, what followed was not a rising column of fire like most imagined volcanoes. It was a horizontal weapon unleashed across the land. From the shattered northern face of Mount St. Helens, a superheated blast of gas, ash, and pulverized rock raced outward at speeds exceeding 300 miles per hour. Temperatures in the core of the flow reached hundreds of degrees, hot enough to strip trees of bark instantly and flash boil moisture from soil. Everything in its path was reduced to geometry. Forests did not burn. They vanished in synchronized collapse, laid down in precise radial patterns pointing away from the volcano, as if an invisible hand had combed the landscape flat. This became known as the blast zone, a scar stretching outward for miles where nothing upright remained. Even terrain that was not directly hit was transformed. Rivers were choked with ash and debris. Hillsides were stripped bare. Wildlife disappeared almost instantly, leaving behind a silence that felt unnatural, even in photographs taken later. The eruption created layers of destruction stacked on top of one another, landslide debris below, blast devastation above, and an expanding ash cloud rising into the sky like a storm that refused to stop growing. In nearby areas, survivors described darkness arriving before the shockwave, a rolling shadow moving across the land faster than anything visible should move, followed by heat, pressure, and then complete stillness where forests once stood. Farther away, the sky began to change color. What had been morning became something closer to twilight as volcanic ash spread across the region and drifted far beyond Washington state, carried by upper-level winds across the United States. The eruption of Mount St. Helens did not end when the blast zone went silent. It was only shifting forms. As the lateral explosion lost force, the volcano began sending a towering column of ash straight upward into the atmosphere. It rose miles high, punching through wind layers and spreading outward like a dark anvil forming above the Pacific Northwest. What fell from it was not rain, it was pulverized earth. Fine volcanic ash drifted down across Washington state, turning daylight into a muted gray haze. Cars parked outdoors became dusted in soft gray powder within minutes. Roads lost traction. Rivers carried sediment thick enough to change their color and flow. Even inside homes, people sealed doors and windows as the sky slowly darkened. The ash cloud continued to expand. Carried by high-altitude winds, it moved across state lines and toward cities that had not seen the eruption, blotting out sunlight in uneven waves as it traveled. In some places, noon looked like dusk. In others, visibility dropped so low that headlights were required during the day. Closer to the volcano, the devastation was absolute. The forests surrounding Mount St. Helens were not simply burned or broken. They were flattened into precise radial patterns pointing outward from the blast, as if the entire landscape had been pressed down by an invisible force. Rescue efforts began slowly, but the terrain made movement difficult. Roads were buried or blocked. Bridges were gone. Entire valleys were reshaped. What remained was not a familiar mountain landscape, but a transformed geological wound, still releasing heat, ash, and steam into a sky that refused to clear. When the ash finally settled, the world that remained around Mount St. Helens no longer matched memory. Search teams moved into a landscape that had been rearranged in hours. Roads ended abruptly where ground had vanished. Rivers ran through new channels carved by debris. Forests stood in ghost formation, trunks stripped bare and aligned in unnatural symmetry, all pointing away from the eruption like a frozen shockwave. The human toll was uneven but devastating. 57 lives were confirmed lost. Some were caught within the blast zone itself, overtaken before they could react. Others were farther away, caught by surprise as the eruption unfolded faster than warnings could reach them. Entire stories ended in minutes, leaving behind vehicles, campsites, and silence where activity had been only moments before. Yet the mountain was not finished speaking. Even in the days after, steam continued to rise from the crater. Small eruptions followed, reminders that the system beneath the volcano was still active. The peak itself was gone, replaced by a massive horseshoe-shaped crater open toward the north, exposing layers of the earth that had been hidden for millennia. Scientists from the United States Geological Survey returned quickly, documenting everything. What they found changed volcanology permanently. The lateral blast had never been fully predicted. The speed of the landslide, the force of the eruption, the scale of destruction, all became case studies in how quickly assumptions about volcanoes could fail. In time, nature began the slow process of rebuilding. Green returned first in pockets, then shrubs, then small trees pushing through ash-rich soil. Spirit Lake filled with floating debris, slowly transforming into a new ecosystem shaped by the eruption itself. But nothing returned to what it had been. The mountain had not simply erupted. It had rewritten the land around it in a single morning. In the years after the eruption of Mount St. Helens, scientists returned not just to measure damage, but to understand what had been learned at the cost of it. What they found was a new language written into the earth. Before 1980, volcanoes were often imagined as slow, predictable systems. Pressure builds, lava rises, eruption follows. But Mount St. Helens shattered that assumption. The collapse of the northern flank, the lateral blast, and the speed of destruction forced a complete rewrite of volcanic models across the world. Entire fields of monitoring changed afterward. Evacuation planning was redesigned. Warning systems became more aggressive. The eruption became a reference point, not just in geology, but in how quickly certainty can fail when nature shifts its behavior. Yet the land itself did something unexpected. It did not remain dead. Within a few seasons, green returned in fractured patterns across the blast zone. Lupine fields spread across ash-rich soil. Small animals returned first, then birds, then forests beginning again from scratch. Life did not restore what was lost. It adapted to what had replaced it. The mountain itself remained changed. A wide crater opened toward the north, exposing its internal structure like a wound that never fully closed. Steam still rises at times. The system beneath is still alive, still monitored, still capable of change. And perhaps that is the final lesson it left behind. Not that mountains are dangerous, but that they are never still. They breathe in time measured far beyond human patience, building pressure in silence until the moment it is no longer possible to hold. And when they finally speak, the world around them does not get a warning shaped like words. It gets the sound of everything changing at once.